Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Is Not a Game, AR and VR for Good. My name is Stacy Trunnell. I'm a senior consultant at Corner Alliance, and I have been supporting PSCR's communications and outreach for the last 2 years. So that everyone's aware of what that means for this panel today, my personal experience with the technologies we're talking about, virtual and augmented reality, is beginner. So that's why I will be asking the questions today. But certainly I have an expert panel to present to you all today, and I'm thrilled to be able to bring this conversation forward. Originally, this talk was actually planned for the South by Southwest Interactive Conference to take place in March 2020 in Austin, Texas. Many of you may have even voted for that panel to make it onto that grand stage, and we certainly are grateful for you to having placed your vote for that. However, the unprecedented events of 2020 really rocked our worlds in March, certainly in the United States. So actually, I'm happy to tell you that this is the debut of that talk that you voted for and that you heard about before. So you are actually the first time viewers of this very important talk. And we are so grateful that you've joined us for the PSCR 2020 journey. I originally did propose this panel for South by Southwest for a couple of reasons, but one thing that I wanted to mention to our viewers today is what I find really interesting about this topic specifically is that there are just a lot of different minds, a lot of varied perspectives that are really needed to advance public safety communications research and development. And when I was thinking about this, and as I've thought about it, it's sort of dawned on me that really every citizen, when you really think about it, is a public safety stakeholder. So what does that mean? What do I mean when I say that? Really everyone is, all of us are beneficiaries of first responders of public safety. So we really, even if we don't quite know it, we really all have a stake in advancing critical communications for first responders. And when we thought about the South by Southwest opportunity, we thought, wow, I think people really need to know about this, even if they're not traditionally involved in public safety. So I'm truly excited today to shed light on this panel because it speaks to that diversity of mindsets, experiences, expertise that can really help push this path forward in a way that benefits not only the creators of this technology, but the beneficiaries, including people like you and me. So we're here now at PSCR 2020 to raise awareness of this opportunity and really how augmented and virtual realities can make a difference for public safety. And I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panel. And I'm going to actually ask my panelists, if, as I introduce them and say a few words about them, why don't you just give a little wave while I introduce you. So my first panelist that I'd like to introduce is Allison Kane. Allison is an electronics engineer at PSCR. So I've worked with Allison closely since 2018. And actually, she has, for the past 3 years in her time at PSCR, been focused on projects that also support the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate. And what Allison does specifically is she focuses on really how the Internet of Things can be used to enhance first responder situational awareness. So you're going to hear Allison weigh in on that perspective today. And then prior to PSCR, Allison did work in wireless telecom for many years. So that's an interesting perspective she brings as well, to see the different ways that broadband technology will be able to enhance communications for public safety with that new area. So welcome, Allison. My next panelist is Captain Kirk McKenzie, and we're thrilled to have him here today. Hello, Kirk. So Captain Kirk recently actually retired from active duty. He was with public safety for more than 30 years in the field, and thank you for your service, Captain Kirk. He actually now serves, because his work is never done, as a subject matter expert and an adjunct professor in the field of next-gen smart first response and community risk reduction. So we're certainly grateful to have you here today, Captain Kirk, and thank you for all that you do. And then finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Greg Rinaldi. Greg leads Magic Leap's developer and creator relations team. So that means that he focuses on both platform evangelism as well as strategic partnerships with the world's most ambitious XR pioneers in industry and entertainment. And that's a beautiful perspective we're going to have today from Greg. He is a 19-year veteran of the interactive entertainment industry and worked for many years at Electronic Arts prior to Magic Leap. He's created dozens of AAA games, mobile experiences, and he's most recently moved into XR, so you'll get to hear a bit about that today. And over the past 3 years, Greg has really focused on ensuring that Magic Leap provides a safe space for creators to stretch their muscles and lean into the impossible. And I really have to say, I love this note about leaning into the impossible, because what we're going to talk about today are concepts and ideas that were just imaginations, just dreams many years ago. And now we're talking about their realities and their very near and dear future applications. I do want to mention for our audience that originally when this talk was proposed, it was coordinated around the time of a very special prize challenge launch from PSCR, and that was the Chariot Challenge. The Chariot Challenge is an augmented reality and Internet of Things challenge, and it's extremely fascinating. At this time, now that we're recording in July, that challenge is actually now in phase 2. And it's very exciting. And there's actually a separate talk that you're able to tune into during the PSCR 2020 digital experience. So in order to see that talk, I would encourage you to go into your PDF portal and navigate to on-demand sessions where you can find that conversation. We are not going to focus on that conversation today, but Greg's company, Magic Leap, is a partner in that challenge. So much of what you'll hear in this talk will be related to what you'll hear in that on-demand session, and we encourage you to check it out. I also want to mention that the emphasis of today's talk is going to stay very focused on the research, the technology, and really the possibilities of these applications now and in the future. So I want to acknowledge, of course, that there are a lot of things going on in the world right now, many things that we could talk about endlessly and debate, especially with such an esteemed panel. But for the sake of really giving you what we promised we would give you from this talk, we are going to stay focused on the technology, on the research, and again, those practical and imagined applications and the dream of what the future could look like. So we're very fortunate to have this esteemed panel here today. I'm personally grateful to each one of them. And I'm also grateful to you, the audience, for tuning in. We're thrilled that you can join us. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start our questions. So my first question, Captain Kirk, is for you. I want to start with you because this really is a conversation about public safety. And I'd love for you to help set the stage for us. Help us understand what current first responder conditions are like, and if there are any myths or misconceptions that you can help shed light on.
Thank you very much, Stacy. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions inside and outside the industry is that fires are down. And the truth is, based on U.S. Fire Administration data, every day, on average, for the past 30 years, 8 U.S. citizens have lost their lives to fire, most in their own homes, about every 2 hours and 45 minutes. And during my career, 3,000 firefighters also lost their lives in their line of work. And it is incredibly challenging in a house fire where there's limited visibility, so much so we might not be able to see our hand in front of our face. And that it's about so much more than fire. There's about 1.25 million fires a year in the US, but there's over 230 million calls for service for first responders. And one of the misconceptions that thankfully with some of these with you and the other colleagues on the panel and some of our friends, we're trying to solve these problems, which is first responders once had advanced technology. When I started, we knew where callers were based on a copper wire that connected their phone to the billing address, and dispatch knew where they were. Well, then with smartphones, we lost that. Starting to get it back, but there's so much more that we can be doing. There's the ability to leverage gaming technology, entertainment, and enterprise capabilities to make safer and more secure communities and provide capabilities for first responders that we're only really just getting started on.
Thank you, Captain Kirk. I'd like to ask Allison and Greg now, when did you all first become aware of the opportunity with VR and AR for public safety, and what did you think about that? Let's start with you, Allison, please.
Well, I would say that my first introduction to the VR and AR technology for public safety was when I joined PSCR, obviously. That was about 4 years ago now. So at the time, VR was a little more prevalent than AR was. And so that was really my first exposure. And when we started talking about it within PSCR, it was to be using it in a training scenario, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because first responders, their training involves them emulating the difficult or dangerous scenarios that they face in reality, to try and get exposure to the techniques that they'll use. And there's still an inherent level of danger just in the training. So to be able to use an environment like VR to emulate an entire scenario and to allow the first responder to enact with an environment without actually being in the dangerous environment is really, really unique and really groundbreaking. And additionally, it adds an element of reliability to the training scenario, repeatability, that the first responders never got before. So really, it gave them a lot of access to a lot of tools that they didn't have in their previous training elements. So I think that's really interesting, and that really piqued my interest to see how we could take these virtual environments and really use them to keep the first responders safer and help them to do their jobs more efficiently, more accurately, just even in the training scenario. It's really unique.
Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. As you mentioned, I've come into the AR and VR space from the gaming and entertainment industry. So my awareness around this type of technology really developed from my fascination, some may say an obsession, with science fiction. Immersive technology has been depicted in fiction for decades. Everything from Star Trek's holodeck to the holographic messages in Star Wars. Those images and concepts really inspired many of us working in the AR and VR industry to imagine how these technologies can amplify and extend the human experience. And the most prolific examples for me as they relate to public safety are when these technologies sort of mimic a superpower, because 3D imagery communicates so much incredible amounts of information in real time. My favorite example in popular fiction is Iron Man. Because in those films, they really started to popularize and made AR almost like a household concept. And those examples really help to illustrate the future potential to provide first responders with near superhuman spatial and situational awareness, which can help to contribute to saving lives in an emergency. So for me, it's really, sort of the aspiration of turning real life heroes into real life superheroes.
That's wonderful. I also have to take a moment to just give a shout out to PSCR's division chief, Derek Orr, because he would love the fact that you just mentioned Marvel, Star Wars, Star Trek. I think you covered everything in your response there. So thank you, Greg. That's excellent. And actually, Greg, another question for you, because I think before we move on, it's really important to distinguish that, of course, VR and AR are different technologies. Can you help us understand those distinct applications, even as they may relate to public safety?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stacy. So, a lot of times we talk about VR and AR as though, they're the same. But while they do share some similarities, they're actually quite different technologies. VR is a complete digital replacement for the physical world, whereas AR really combines the digital and the physical worlds in real time. VR's strength is that it can virtually transport you to another place in time. So, as Allison mentioned, I feel like the most viable use cases for VR in public safety really lie in those virtual training scenarios. A well-designed VR training simulation can place a first responder in a mock scenario where they can repeatedly and at relatively low cost and low risk, practice life-saving skills, which can help them become better prepared, to deal with a real-world emergency. By contrast, AR has a much broader potential for use cases in the field. Many of us working in the AR industry prefer to think about it as a suite of technologies, which we call spatial computing. And that's the marriage, as I mentioned, the marriage of digital and physical worlds where one understands the other. Today, for example, we access digital information. When we do that, we usually do it through a two-dimensional screen, whether it's through our laptops or through our mobile phones. But that's a bit archaic and clumsy if you think about the fact that, we live and interact in a 3D space. So for first responders, marrying physical and digital realities has the potential to positively impact the outcome of life and death situations. For example, when responding to an active emergency, first responders need to have physical awareness regarding the environment they're operating in, its geography, its terrain, the buildings, and other physical structures. And they also need a situational awareness, what's happening in the field right now. And the need to understand who are the actors involved, what are the immediate dangers present to them, their teammates, any civilians that happen to be in harm's way. And all of this information is critical to ensure that they can quickly and effectively respond. So via spatial computing technologies, you can begin to marry physical and situational awareness by providing access to contextual information through a spatial interface directly in your field of vision. So for example, through 3D mapping techniques like SLAM and building information modeling, you can create a digital twin of a physical environment. And then with IoT-powered devices, you can stream live data that really helps to track and pinpoint environmental conditions, and then send that information in real time to a visual spatial interface to give responders what amounts to an amplified perception and an understanding of the situation that's really difficult to get through a two-dimensional screen. And then, then you start really understanding those superhero potentials that until now we've only seen in fiction.
Just incredible. Again, making the imaginative, the imagined reality quite real for us. And Greg, I do believe you've already spoken about this a bit, but just to help our viewers really understand, you bring this very valuable industry perspective for us. Help us understand, what is VR and AR at its best? From your experience getting feedback from consumers and different types of users, what should we take forward with this group?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for spatial computing, it's about providing visibility where previously there was none, and also having access to critical information through a natural and human-centric interface. And I think that last part is really important because XR technology is wearable technology. So the human factor is the most critical element. The ideal XR device is considering and integrating with human physiology where the technology almost becomes invisible. I'm wearing glasses right now, and I wear glasses every day, and I don't even think about the fact that I'm wearing glasses. It corrects my vision. It's how I experience the world. So the holy grail, for us in the industry is to develop a product that not only delivers exceptional experience, but it's lightweight, it's comfortable to wear for extended periods of time, and it enables natural and intuitive interactions for the user. The challenge here is, people tend to come in a variety of shapes and sizes. They have different ranges of motor function. They respond differently to different types of stimuli. And for first responders in particular, they need to have their hands free because they're already wearing heavy equipment. They need technology that isn't overly cumbersome. So at Magically, we've considered many of these factors when we designed our first product, so it better integrates with the user's physiology. For example, we've redistributed the total weight of our device so that our light pack, which contains our compute and our battery, is separate from our light wear, which is our headset. And it makes it much more comfortable to wear the device for an extended period. It was because we offloaded most of the weight off of your head. The other thing, is that we provide a very large sort of suite of input methods. So we have a 6 degree of freedom controller, but we also provide head tracking, eye tracking, articulated hand tracking, voice input. So it really allows developers of solutions to design what we call multimodal input techniques. So that means you're not restricted to just one input method. And in fact, some of the best interfaces that I've seen combine multiple input methods. For example, you could simply look at a menu using eye tracking, select it, and then give a thumbs up gesture to confirm your selection. And all of these considerations, if you combine them together, they make for a very unique and human-centric computing platform that's really unlike most of the technology we're using today.
And Captain Kirk, as our public safety expert, I'd really love to get your perspective on some of what Greg has just shared. So what, from your experience, what's unique about the technology and user requirements for first responders that we should keep in mind?
And before I get there, I just have to say how grateful I am both that NIST is Allison, this incredible engineer, and Greg, this enterprise experience provider, to be talking about these things. And I never imagined when I said to my crews, yeah, like if we had Princess Leia inside the fire engine, and they all look at me like, what? But then we have teams working on this already, including gaming experts. It's incredible to think, because what we have now is LMR, or land mobile radio, which is a bit like 2 tin cans in a string compared to where we could be with SLAM, or simultaneous location area mapping, spatial computing. And we need to go there. So what we're going to need is generations of service providers and the public to get on board with the concept. We need public-private partnerships where we build the solution. It's going to have to be reliable from the onset. I mean, right out of the gate. While we do everything in the fire service, from heart attack and other medical emergencies to car crashes and trench rescues and water rescues and all sorts of things, if we just think about just a basic firefighting, when we go into a house fire, it's 50 pounds of gear to start with. If we go to a high-rise fire, it's 125 pounds of gear. So it's going to have to be agile, hardened. It's going to have to be able to handle cold and heat. And for the public, and in the end, we want it for the public, like Pokemon Go for the public, but like 911 Go, like a platform. So it needs to be platform agnostic, ubiquitous for both first responders and the public, and reliable and intuitive. Like Greg says, one day this will be the form factor. I don't know how soon, but it's just going to be like, we're just used to it, just like we're used to regular 2D computing platforms. But so I think.
Well, Allison, as our engineering and research expert, I would really welcome your perspective on this to our conversation. What types of challenges are you seeing when taking this type of end user into consideration?
Well, one of the biggest things is just getting people to understand the first responders environment. when they enter a scene, everything's in flux. And I know I was guilty of this when I first came on board. When you think of the stereotypical firefighter, police officer, it seems like a pretty straightforward job. You know, they're there to fight the fire or catch the bad guy or whatever. But actually, the amount of information that they get regarding the scene that they're supposed to be responding to is very minimal. So there's a lot of problem solving. There's a lot of really fast-paced, critical thinking going on. And Captain Kirk alluded to it, reliability is a huge issue because up until this point, first responders have to get on the scene and they use what they have available to them now, their senses, and some minimal information from dispatch to make assessments of the situation. And we're asking them to supplement this with technology. And so reliability is huge, and it needs to be easy to use, and it needs to be fast. I spent probably 5 different tries getting my Bluetooth headphones paired to this PC and making sure both had audio. And I have that luxury, but when a firefighter is entering a burning building, he really does not want to lose that audio. So, you know, the reliability and the stability of the hardware and the software is really critical for the first responders, and making sure that when we give them this technology, that it doesn't suddenly disappear on them right when they need it the most. So it's definitely a unique use case.
Well, thank you for enlightening us to all of those perspectives, to my panelists. I do want to ask, I want to learn a little bit more about these virtual environments. So my next question is for Greg. Because Greg, I think that many of us are familiar in one way or another of virtual environments from an entertainment perspective. So when thinking about this public safety application, how are the principles and practices from gaming, 3D and motion graphics, and even AI permeating other industries, including those in the public sector?
Yeah, so game technologies and design principles from the games industry have had a long-running history of driving innovation in other industries. GPUs, for example, which first became popular in the private sector thanks to the proliferation of PC gaming, are now being used to power AI perception for self-driving vehicles. The defense industry has leveraged game engine technology for decades to run virtual training simulations. And with this recent emergence of innovation in XR, that trend is accelerating across nearly every major industry, including healthcare, manufacturing, education, of course, first responders and public safety. I'm someone who's grown up in the gaming industry, and for me, the technology, this sort of technological convergence that we're seeing always has seemed like a sort of inevitability. Because as I mentioned earlier, we live and operate in 3 dimensions, and the games industry has always been heavily focused on simulating 3D worlds that feel immersive and believable to the user. And I think what's really interesting to consider is how some game design paradigms can work their way into real world use cases. So if you think about most multiplayer games, they create a user interface that provides a deep situational awareness so that you generally don't get that in the real world. Those games show you objective waypoints. They show you the real-time location of your teammates. They show you a 3D map of your environment. Of course, they grant you superhuman abilities like the ability to see through walls or around corners. And these are the same kinds of capabilities that we're looking to enable for real-world use cases using similar design principles and technologies. Of course, it's a bit more complex when it comes to spatial computing, because unlike with traditional games or even with VR, as a developer, you don't have complete carte blanche and control over the user experience. You're dealing with the real world, so you have to deal with the variables of the real world. And to do that, you have to do that seamlessly. You have to integrate that with digital elements, into that environment. So it's going to take really a combination of traditional game techniques combined with new technologies like real-time 3D mapping. Captain Kirk mentioned SLAM, computer vision, AI and machine learning, IoT, and high-speed networks. All of these sort of technologies have to converge and interoperate together to realize the full potential of spatial computing.
And Captain Kirk, we know you have 30 years of active duty experience, so I would love to hear from you. Have you seen the technologies that Greg is talking about already being applied in first responder scenarios?
Certainly, VR is helping us move from basic two-way voice communication and maybe some video communication to do public education into immersive learning environments for pub ed and for first responder training. For pub ed, we can do things like people can put their phone into a cardboard viewer, scan a QR code, and go for a ride in the fire engine and learn to pull to the side of the road for sirens and lights, which estimates in the US, several estimates would say we might save more than 10,000 lives in a year if we could reduce response times by a minute across our 230 million calls a year. We're doing command training in VR for firefighters, fire extinguisher training for public. There's dozens of teams working on this, on immersive learning. On the long range, yeah, what we're capable of on citizens' phones and in first responders, we can use the new tablets have built-in solid state laser scanning capabilities. We could map any room we're in 3D, upload it to the cloud, edge compute, and bam, slam is possible all of a sudden, so that we can get to that application on the phone that isn't simply calling 911 and painting a picture with words. All of a sudden we have the capability of doing spatial computing like you might see some enterprise teams are using it to try on different sneakers, see what color the sneaker looks like on my, before I buy it. Well, that's clever and all, but what's the next thing for public safety? And it's coming.
Those are great insights, Captain Kirk. And I think that, generally when we see something like these technologies and these innovations we're talking about here today, they're so transformative. I think each of you have already suggested that there's a significant cultural and operational impact being felt, now and in the future. So one of the things I've heard in circumstances such as these, for example, is citizens even asking, well, all this information and all this technology and the instantaneous nature of it is really cool. But what kind of information is this first responder going to have about me? And what are they going to do about it? And is this a privacy issue? So it's certainly a concern, an area that I'm quite aware of, which is that question of privacy. And I know that speaking for myself as well as the panelists here today, we're very much aware of that concern, and we care deeply about those privacy concerns. However, as a reminder to really myself, my panelists, and all of you who are tuned in, I think that would be a focus for a different talk. So we're about halfway through here, and we're going to continue focusing on these questions about the technology, the research, and the true possibilities of AR and VR for good. And with that being said, I'd really like to turn my next question to Greg to start. In your opinion, in your experience, Greg, what needs to change, be it something, cultural, economical, technological, environmental, sort of the list goes on, but what needs to change culturally, economically, technologically, maybe even environmentally, to make public sector applications of VR and AR more possible?
So, we covered on the panel today, training focused applications are possible and viable to deploy today. For example, I was speaking with a developer who's building a fire safety training solution for Magic Leap to help train office workers on how to respond in their event of a real life emergency. But for broader applications and in-field use, I think there are two major factors to consider. The first is awareness. While those of us that have a keen interest in this technology and an interest in innovation, at large, we tend to be hyper aware of the strides that are taking place in the AR and VR industries. But most people at best are peripherally aware, and this is an age-old challenge for the tech industry. It's not unique to, AR and VR. Every major computing platform, from the PC to the internet to the mobile phone, emerged by super serving a niche market before exploding into the public consciousness. The challenge with AR and VR is that they're experiential technologies. As I mentioned, they're wearable technologies. And so they're virtually impossible to replicate through traditional screens or 2D media. You can't truly understand the potential of this technology without experiencing it firsthand. And then the second thing is as I mentioned before, is technological maturity. Some of the most interesting and disruptive use cases that we're talking about today, it's possible to pilot and prototype these types of experiences today, but they're really going to require several parallel technological advances to get to a level of maturity where they can be deployed reliably in the field. And that includes, not only innovations within sort of the XR hardware itself, but also, as I've mentioned, AI and machine learning, widespread availability of IoT data, and some level of standardization with that data, so that these different devices can consume it. And I think as well as the delivery of that data through 5G and edge computing capabilities.
Thank you, Greg. I think that this is a perfect time to follow up with you, Captain Kirk, and you and both Allison actually mentioned earlier how critical it is that reliability is really built in and accounted for at the onset. So I say that because, Captain Kirk, we've experienced that typically first responders may be the last to adopt a new technology. It's simply too dangerous for them to be testers in real life. They can't try and retry to pair those Bluetooth headphones when they're in an actual life and death situation. But what's it going to take? What's it going to take for new technologies like this to find their way into the hands of public safety practitioners?
Yeah, I think it'll take several things, and Greg mentioned a couple of them, that it'll be disruptive in a lot of parts of our daily life for everyone, from doing ride share or using an app on your phone to order pizza delivered rather quickly in the crisis we find ourselves in these days. How do we leverage it? It's going to take some cultural shifts, both within the first response community and a building of awareness and rebuilding of some trust with the public. For like the paramedicine side of the first response work, protecting medical records is critically important. That's a given. When will someone choose to go from sharing their credit card number and their location for a ride share or a pizza delivery, and when, well, we're going to have to make it really secure and reliable before they're going to want to share anything important or personal. So lots of privacy and security issues. We're in the first the first data revolution, if you will, the fourth industrial revolution. It's all new. We're all still trying to figure out how are we going to move the ball. So I'd say there's some PhDs who are beginning to focus in programs on digital ethics to help pave the road. We don't know what it looks like yet, but there are a few teams, some colleagues of mine, that are working internationally with generic open source data that's not relevant to any person or place. But let's build it in the cloud in 3D and work with data that means nothing to anyone other than it's something that we can work together to build these platforms. That's all part of the suite of digital solutions for the VR roadmap to smart community risk reduction.
So one of the reasons that we gathered this panel of experts together today is that we want to get people excited about what's coming. So you're hearing a lot about what's going on with public safety, what is unique about these technologies, but we know that there has to be a market. for those of you out there working on these fields, in these fields. Maybe you're a developer, you're a manufacturer. And I think one of the questions we want to visit here today is, what is the market opportunity for VR and AR in public safety? And Greg, I'd like to start with you, and I do want to say I'd love to hear from all of my panelists on this question, because you bring such rich and diverse perspectives. And we know that our audience viewing today is likely as rich and diverse as well. So let's start with you, Greg. Market opportunity for VR and AR in public safety, and any thoughts you have on who or what will drive these future opportunities in the space.
Yeah, I mean, the space is pretty interesting right now. I think there's an example you could build, today with off-the-shelf hardware and software. You can create, for example, an AR version of a fire escape route that's pinned inside of an office building. In the event of an emergency, whether you're wearing an AR device or you have an AR-enabled mobile phone, which many of us do today, you can view that spatial map and locate a path to safety overlaid on top of your sort of line of sight. Much more efficient and effective than trying to find, the map on the wall in the smoke-filled environment. What we're seeing in in terms of the market right now is a lot of traction in the private sector in sort of enterprise use cases with our business customers. An example, that we're working on with some of our developer partners is spatial guides, for employees performing whether it's sequenced maintenance tasks, on machinery in a factory, or it's moving inventory around a warehouse. Because you can have spatial data integrated within the employee's environment, these businesses are starting to see significant improvements in productivity and worker training as well. Especially when you have to train. We had, for example, there was manufacturers who are switching their lines to produce PPE, and you have to train a bunch of staff really quickly on new techniques, new machinery. Doing that spatially through AR-enabled technology really increases the productivity and the time to sort of efficiency within those environments. It's that really amplified perception that we've been talking about, that sort of superhuman perception and situational awareness. As far as what's next for growth and impact, I think like most technology, the hardware will obviously continue to mature. It'll get lighter, it'll get more performant, it'll get more reliable, it'll get less expensive with every generation. In parallel, we're seeing a lot of innovation in persistent sort of cloud-enabled spatial data. Some people call it the AR cloud or the spatial cloud. What that kind of a cloud architecture can allow you to do is to, for example, remotely render highly complex, 3D data in the cloud, which means you can have much lighter hardware on the user. You don't have to have a GPU, for example, or a highly powered GPU on the client side. You'll also be able to persist 3D digital content and pin it to the physical world, so that you can have a variety of XR-enabled experiences, whether that's VR, mobile, AR, or wearable AR, and all devices will be able to access that content collectively. I like to think of it as a 3D spatial internet. Instead of having sites that are virtual, you have physical sites. You have a physical space where you can pin digital content and localize that content, and then manage that content. So again, when first responders, for example, come to a scene, there's content that is specific to that location that's going to help them do their jobs better.
Captain Kirk, your thoughts?
That's exactly what I've been talking about, Greg. And so I would say enterprise is poised, very poised, to leverage the emerging hardware and software to enable to save lives. The mixed reality, edge computing, AR, IoT, SLAM, BIM, computer and spatial vision, ML and AI. It's a great world to live in. That with technology we can make a difference. Citizens will be able to communicate with paramedics in a car crash or in a heart attack. Instead of painting a picture with words, we can be doing all of this in 3D. They can escape harm in an active shooter incident. They could know the layout of the building in 3D. They could know safety zones in an earthquake or a wildfire. And the enterprise teams who need the business model, I want them, with the developers and manufacturers, to think about that I believe there's about 4.5 billion connected souls on the planet, roughly 30 billion connected devices. let's work on privacy and security, opt-in and opt-out, and harden it, make it reliable for the public safety community. But there's the market opportunity is there already.
Allison, would love your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think both Greg and Captain Kirk made some excellent points. Coming from my research perspective, I think one of the biggest opportunities is the fact that, you know, as we as people become more connected, so do our environments. You know, Captain Kirk talked about the building information models, BIM, and you know, the sensors and the alerts that are starting to spread throughout our communities are really going to be just great information sources for first responders. You know, Captain Kirk alluded to how earlier, you know, first responders used to have access to the location of people and then lost it with the advent of mobile devices. And so we're seeing this enhanced need for location. Outdoors is pretty good, but indoors is like a huge issue for first responders, and one that I come across a lot when talking to them. And just being able to, once you're inside a building, know which floor you're on, where your team members are at, where potential victims are at, that's huge. But then when you talk about, you know, connected vehicles that are starting to come online, the amount of information that first responders can get from that, you know, we really, as one-off solutions come about, that's great. But, you know, as it becomes more and more widespread, we need to start looking at how that information can be handled by first responders and can be integrated into their situational awareness. And that'll really give them some great context in the environment that they're in and make them safer and help the people that they're trying to save as well. So there's tons of opportunities just in our entire environment right now.
And I want to say that in my experience working with PSCR and especially listening to the panelists of this talk, I have learned and come to realize that there are just a multitude of opportunities for people to get involved in this space. In fact, part of our original goal with the South by Southwest talk was to raise awareness around the opportunities for perhaps more creative types of people, technology types of people like developers, coders, programmers, again, people who may not typically think that there's a role for them within public safety. Of course, we're here to dispel that myth and personally invite people to join this mission. And one of the things I'd like to ask, and I want to start with you, Greg, because again, I think that your experience sheds a lot of light on someone maybe in a different industry having an application here. What are the skills, talents, or attitudes that you have noticed are translatable to VR and AR applications, especially as we are talking about them for public safety? And are there certain traits or even mottos that you recognize that the successful person in this field would possess?
Yeah, first, you know, I'd say you really need to possess a high degree of curiosity, tenacity, and most importantly, a willingness to experiment and try something, you know, maybe nobody's done before. And that means you're going to have to accept there'll be setbacks, and you need to learn from that and move forward. You know, these are the early days of this space, and you know, I'd advise you also to be wary of anyone claiming to be VR AR experts. Because frankly, there are very few experts in this field. Even those of us who've been working in this space for several years are just now beginning to scratch the surface of what's possible and what can be viable in the long term. So I'd say, you know, we're not yet in the time of experts. We're in the time of explorers. So we need explorers. We need people who are willing to pioneer and learn and accept setbacks and learn from that and then push forward. From my perspective, that's inspiring to be involved in this industry at this time, because what's possible today is actually pretty incredible. And we're seeing rapid innovation on a regular basis and a lot of growth across the industry, which means that the possibility space is only going to exponentially expand in the next 3 to 5 years. And then secondly, I would say you need to establish a really strong understanding of 3D spatial design concepts and human factors. As I mentioned earlier, this is wearable technology, and so the most successful and disruptive applications are going to be built by those who develop a deep understanding of how these technologies work and how they can enhance and amplify human physiology. So, don't forget the user and your user experience design. That holds much, even more true for wearable technology, because you don't want that technology to be intrusive. You want it to feel natural. And so I think that's a great area of study and a great perspective to bring if you want to help us in this space.
And Allison, I would love your thoughts as well. I know that you've mentioned you've been with PSCR for 3 years, and that was sort of an eye-opening experience for you. So what advice do you have to share?
Well, I love Greg's statement that we're all explorers here, and I really think that when you're working in this kind of area, it really shows how much technologists and developers can really, like, I don't know, almost have an artistry to what they do. For all consumers, for all people who use wearable technologies, like Greg said, it's really important to understand the human factors. And I would say in the first responder scenario, it's doubly important to understand their environment that they're working in, because there's so many things that can impede the way that they interact with their information, whether it's environmental noise that limits the sounds that they can hear, or as Captain Kirk alluded to, the equipment that they utilize that inhibits how they can utilize their technology. There's so much to discover around the first responders environment and how they need to ingest their information. And so I would strongly support what Greg said. You just have to really be aware of the environment that you're developing for. That's really what's going to give first responders solutions that they can utilize and that will really help them. And it may not make sense for your standard commercial environment. So really the people who are going to be developing for first responders need to kind of think a little bit even further outside the box, and really try to inform themselves of that environment. Just kind of dream big with their scenarios. So it's a really, really cool time to see technology developing for this.
And Allison, I truly appreciate your emphasis on understanding the first responder as the end user. I think that is a very unique circumstance to be in, and that first part of user experience. And I think, Greg, you mentioned this as well, is listen, sort of empathize and understand that it's their environment first before developing for them. So we're coming to sort of the close of our talk, which is sad because I would love for this group to go on for forever. It's been a delight to work with them. But I do want to ask a couple more questions in the short time we have left, and I'd love to hear from all our panelists. And we will hear from all of them. But first and foremost, I want to pose this question, Allison, to you, especially because of the work that you're doing in IoT. Many of us today are just these walking sensor networks, whether it's our watches or our phones. There's buildings pinging us all the time. The more and more we're doing this and we're seeing this happen, we understand that the spectrum is becoming a bit stretched. So, of course, everyone is talking about 5G. We've heard a lot about 5G for quite some time now. And in fact, there are some panels on 5G during this digital experience. But Allison, from your research and engineering perspective, based on everything that we are talking about here today, what should our viewers take away, what does 5G mean for all of this?
That's a good question. You know, from my perspective, when I came to PSCR, we were still firmly on the fourth generation LTE network, which is, you know, what's primarily out there today. And when that was built, I mean, even 4G was a game changer for the way we utilized mobile data, mobile internet. And, you know, when we built that, we didn't have this enhanced concept of priority to where we would have these super high priority users, like first responders that would need to utilize this data in a completely uninterruptible manner. So, you know, in 4G standards, we went back and we added enhanced mission critical priorities for the first responders and for these mission critical positions. So that was difficult. And what 5G is going to bring us is a network that was built after we realized that we could utilize mobile data for everything. So we're going to have this enhanced ability to categorize how people access data, really kind of drill down into you know, making the data available to everyone. And that's going to really just, you know, break the ability for VR and AR to exist everywhere wide open, because we're going to have access to this data and the ability to, you know, add data where needed, pull back on other users where needed, to really just give it this granular access. And I think that's really just going to be a game changer for all of these technologies that we're talking about, from AR to connected everything. You know, 5G is just really going to eventually enhance the way we access data in our lives. And I think it's really going to be a cool just evolution of our mobile environment.
Greg, I'm curious to know, do you have anything to add on this topic?
Yeah, I think you know, Allison brings up a great point. It's really important that we, you know, develop 5G technologies with the first responder use case in mind. I'll use a potential future scenario as an example. You know, if you have first responders, say they're responding to a fire emergency at a high rise, you can have those in the command center, you know, with the ability to view, you know, via AR wearable technology, a real-time 3D representation of the building, floor by floor, including locations of fire escapes, electrical systems, HVAC. You really need a high bandwidth, low latency network to deliver that building information data, along with real-time data from connected IoT sensors located throughout the building, to pinpoint location of the fire, how it's spreading, you know, are there civilians in danger, you know, monitoring their movements potentially via motion sensors or cameras. All of that, having all that information overlaid on a sort of spatial model is really powerful situational awareness. But again, you need a really high-speed network to provide that. And then the other thing, you know, to consider is, you know, that's the tabletop view. That's something you could, you know, like some prototype and potentially even deploy, you know, as a pilot or a prototype in a training scenario. Now imagine, you know, those same firefighters are actually on the scene and they have 3D information, you know, in their field of view directly on top of the building. So you scale up that tabletop model to full scale, and then that, you know, that situation that Allison was mentioning, where, you know, they need to know what floor they're on. They need to, you know, maybe you know, point the way for them because they're in a smoke-filled environment. It's second by second that's happening. So the latency, or the lack thereof, I should say, is really critical, you know, to provide that, you know, to those users. So I think the ultimate, and I've mentioned this before, the sort of the ultimate for this technology is where we have all of these sort of pieces working together. So you've got the, you know, you've got the hardware, you've got the cloud data, and you've got the delivery network, you know, all sort of working in concert. And so I'm really excited about what's coming on the horizon with 5G. I think it's, you know, it is a step change for us in terms of capabilities, and a critical component to what we're talking about today.
Well, there is just no doubt that there's a lot to be excited about right now and in the very near future. This does bring us to the end of our question round with me as moderator. There will be a Q&A afterwards for our attendees today. But I do want to sincerely thank each of my panelists for being on this journey and for sharing their time and their perspectives. It's really helped pushing this dialogue forward, and that's what we need. Before we wrap up, I am going to ask for one more thing from my panelists. I would like to hear a very short final thought, call to action, 30 seconds or less from each of you. I'm going to start with Captain Kirk.
Thank you very much, Stacy. Thanks for having me. I would say to the citizens, the startups, developers, government, everyone who might have an interest here, might bring one small nugget, just a crumb to this, think about that one day what you bring to the table might make a difference. More than 100 people die a minute around the world. What if you could save the life of someone you've never met, your neighbor, your parent, your child, or even your own? Because VR and AR for public safety, certainly not a game.
Thank you, Captain Kirk. Allison, let's go to you.
Oh man, that was really good. I would just say, as I've been saying, like, you know what your first responder has to deal with. Understand their environment, understand who you're building towards, and get out there and, like Captain Kirk said, help them.
And Greg, last but not least.
Yeah, I would say, this technology is already disrupting a number of industries, and that's going to continue to happen sort of as a domino effect as the technology matures. So this is a great time to get a head start. I'd recommend spending significant time getting to know the technologies and what's possible today. So try out as many XR products and experiences as you can. You generally can't understand this in the third person. It's like trying to describe TV on the radio. And since we've established that I'm a sci-fi geek, I'll quote one of my favorite films. Nobody can be told what the Matrix is. You have to experience it for yourself. So I'm confident that once you really start to get familiar with this technology, you'll start to understand how limitless the possible applications are. So explore what's out there and just get inspired.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Allison, and thank you, Captain Kirk. It's been a real pleasure to work with you and speak with you today. Thank you to all of the attendees. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you'll stay on the line. We will follow up with a live Q&A, and everyone stay safe and be well.